Jim?
Hey, good morning or good afternoon to everybody. I am Jim Whitaker, and just a little background on me. I am the past president CEO of the ARC Jacksonville, recently retired. I was also the past president of ARC Florida, and I am a board member of Together for Choice. And now I am a specialized housing consultant. Ashley and I put this presentation together thinking that there's a lot of interest out there in creating communities, some intentional, some not. And we're going to start off with some very basic, sort of elementary sort of things. And if you or your organization has already moved past, this, just please bear with us. But we know there are folks on here that really haven't started the process. They're just thinking about an intentional or a special community within their own community. So the next slide, what we're going to talk about is, do you have the right assets and skills, to actually move a project forward? I'm going to hit you with a big one right at the beginning here, financial assets. If your group is just sort of in the thought process of a development, you need to be thinking about there are going to be many, many expenses related moving forward to make this happen. So we actually recommend an organization have about $300,000 to $500,000 to really get serious about creating an intentional community. And some of these costs may include consulting fees, legal fees, architectural fees, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many, many things related that will actually cost the organization money. Within your group, also political assets are absolutely necessary, especially if you're looking at funding that might be coming from a state level or national level. So connections, and of course in your own community as well, your county commissioners, your city commissioners and all can be very, very helpful, possibly even identifying some vacant property and all. These are the skills and knowledge that would be very, very helpful to have within your group. It doesn't mean that one person knows how to do all these things, but legal and finance is a critical part of this. Not-for-profit management would be very, very helpful. Fundraising. Does anybody on your team have fundraising experience, especially if you're going to launch a capital campaign at some point in time? Networking, extremely important to start networking with other families, etc. You need to build your organization and the interest in a project. Land acquisition, planning, and development. Again, if you have board members or parents who have these skills, excellent. Also, too, advocacy, marketing, and public relation experience will go a long ways. Operations, housing, and support services. And we're going to talk more about this in the presentation, but the bricks and mortar are just a part of this. How is the place going to operate? How are folks going to actually access the services and supports they need? And also regulatory compliance. There's lots of things locally, that regulations that you have to comply with. There's going to be state regulations. And depending on what funding you're going after, the regulations can be forever. And of course, if you're going to be providing support services, your support services group are going to have to comply with Medicaid waiver and other regulations as well. Next slide, Ashley. It's really important to make sure you have the right people on your team. And again, the bigger you can build your team, the better. If one or two individuals try to make this happen, it's not likely going to happen. You really need to start reaching out to the other families that you know, have them contact families that they know, and also to other members of your local community who want this project to happen. Everybody does not have to be a family member, but if you have individuals that can help collaborate on this project, you're just going to get further in a much quicker time. Service providers. Now, for those of you who aren't service providers currently, you're going to need to look at a combination, if you will. For instance, if your group, is going to pursue the funding, the bricks and mortar part of this, you need to start thinking about a service provider partner. Who's going to provide those essential services, such as supported living coaching, personal supports, whatever it might be that your community needs to serve the individuals there. One of the easiest ways to do this, I think, is within your community. If there is a strong service provider already that has a reputation, a good reputation in your community, and is financially solvent and shares the same mission that you are thinking about and the same vision, it would be great to partner with them early on to be part of this project. A lot of the things that you're going to need to do, they may already have in place. For instance, they already may have a development team that is out there in the community raising money. So again, this could be a collaborative project. You don't have to do it yourself. And actually, it would be much easier if you could identify such a partner going forward. Do you have the right people, donors? And again, to move the project forward, just really in the beginning, you're going to need resources. So do you have donors? And of course, families, who are interested in this sort of project should step up to the plate and make a capital campaign contribution to the project to get it going forward. Most donors that you're going to approach that aren't family members, they're going to want to know what skin in the game the family members have put forth. So it's very, very important to rally your families around the mission, the vision, and also make a financial contribution to move the project forward. Of course, you're going to need volunteers. And again, as many volunteers as you can get involved, the better. You need to start talking it up, etc. Politicians, most important. Every single state in the country is different as far as what is now available in housing financing. And, again, it's great to, if you're not already connected, your local politicians, your state politicians, and also your congressional members, etc., to really become knowledgeable of what is available and to solicit their support. Community leaders, you want your local delegation, your mayor, your other city commissioners, county commissioners, to know about your vision, etc. And again, they can be very, very helpful when it comes to identifying resources and really potential property that may be just surplus property within your community and all. Professionals, you want to make sure that you also have access and on your team to an attorneys. And usually most attorneys will get you going pro bono, okay? And we're going to talk about some of the things that you're going to need to start early on. An accountant would be great to have, bankers, a developer, somebody within your community who is a developer, an architect, engineers, eventually a project manager, and again, a fundraiser and a realtor. There's a lot of steps in prepping for an eventual development. Ashley, next slide, please. Getting started is organizationally. You can do this on your own. It has been done, but it's a mountain to climb as opposed to maybe a hill. If you work with others, and specifically other already solid not-for-profit organizations, again, that would share your vision, this will be a much, much easier task. You want to, again, identify as many, many family members as you can to be part of the process. Early on, you want to hold focus groups with families and the potential individuals which you would serve. And again, you want to solicit input from families. Again, your vision may not be the same vision of the majority of people. So, you need to do some collaboration and figure out exactly kind of where you're going with this. And then, of course, you're going to need to host some strategic planning, and you're going to need to eventually establish your mission and your vision, which will also lead to some printed materials, etc. Things that you do want to consider when you have a group of people. Families need to be transparent about their child's needs. There are many, many individuals out there that need housing. And these individuals may be some of them may be fairly independent and really don't need a lot of supports, from staff. There may be others that need tremendous amount of supports. They have more challenges, so again, you sort of need to find out from families what type of services their children will require. And again, you want to work with the group to make sure there's a likability, that everybody likes each other and no one's pulling in the opposite direction, etc. You need to kind of move forward in a straight line. Chemistry is real important. Always there's going to be some leader, and your group would, elect a leader, obviously, to speak for the group. But chemistry is essential, compatibility, and we want to make sure every family has an opportunity to contribute to the conversation and all. And again, this cannot be just one person's dream. And commitment is probably the biggest. This is long term. It is not going to happen in a year, probably 2 years. It's several years. Typically, most intentional communities, the earliest one I've ever seen get off the ground took 3 years, and it's usually up to about 5 years. So anyway, it is a long-term process. And everybody just needs to remember to respect each other, all the time, and to make sure that everybody is heard. When you get to your strategic planning questions, you do need to ask, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of the project? Who is your target population? And again, these are things that you need to consider. Are you going to focus this community on a very, very specific demographic of the IDD population? For instance, is it for people who are going to be fairly independent and need little to no supports? Or is the community intended to serve a group of people that have higher needs and will need more 24-hour supports and care? Typically, having a community, that fits all does not work well. The demographics are going to be very, very important in your decision making as to how you move forward. Also, too, what do you want the community to look like? Are you in a very urban area and there's very little land that's affordable? Maybe you need to think about going up, multi-story. If you're in a more rural area or in the suburbs where there may be more property, maybe you want it all single story. Also, too, if it's out in the country, you may want to consider things like a farmstead. And we're going to talk about all these models throughout the program today. What are your desired outcomes? I think most families, they want a home that's forever for their kid. Also, too, it's safe, where when they go home, they're safe. Also, too, where there's all kinds of opportunities for social engagement. And, there's also access to the other essential things in the community, such as employment, medical services, and also entertainment. And then you're going to get to, how are you going to make all this happen? And again, that's where all the research work comes in, to make this dream sort of come true. And then tracking your success. You need to have some real specific goals and objectives and individuals assigned to those to make things happen. So when you do meet on a regular basis, people are reporting on progress. Hey, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley now, and she's going to cover the next few.
Thank you, Jim. So when you come together as a group, the first thing that needs to be addressed is this: who is your target population? Obviously, for those of you who are family members, you have to start with your own child. And somebody was asking you about what that child means. It's a grown-up adult, but it's regardless of their development stage, they're your child. And for your providers, you're trying to address the need of your current or potential future clients. So is your child capable of living on his own with limited or intermittent support? Or does your child or client require a high level of intense medical and or behavioral support, or both, right? So bear with me, I'm going to next slide onto the next one. So depending on your answer, you can have a better understanding of what type of setting would help meet their needs and what type of setting would he or she would be best supported and be happy and content. Now, we know that it's not just about physical building or a design of a unit that makes a great community or a great setting. What makes a great setting or community is living in a safe and loving home, experiencing social connectedness, enjoying lasting friendships, having a sense of purpose, being able to wake up every day, knowing that you belong and that you have a purpose. And that's very important. So if any of these settings, licensed group homes, farmsteads, neurodiverse neighborhoods, or living in your own apartment or home, continuum of care, live, work, play campuses, if any of these settings can offer what I describe as a great community, then that's an ideal setting, in my opinion. And but high DD housing is more than just housing, right? For those of you who are attending today's webinar, you're probably interested in learning about housing that comes with some type of support services. And in the world of affordable housing, we use a term permanent supportive housing, which is a combination of housing and support services. For some folks, those housing and supports can be paid out of pocket. But for the majority of Americans with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the reality is that they need to rely on public funding. So when you think about Medicaid funded support services, which are usually funded by home and community-based waivers, you have to understand how to comply with the Medicaid HCBS settings rule, which is a federal Medicaid rule that establishes what setting in which people receive home and community-based services would be eligible for Medicaid funding. The CMS establishes the federal standard, but states have a lot of flexibility to be more restrictive than the settings rule itself. So it's really important that you take time to understand all the public benefits and the regulations and rules pertaining to disability rights, fair housing, and the federal settings rule, regardless of whether you take government money or not. And we're not going to get into all the details of the rules and regulations. We actually do have many contents on our website, our media page of our website. We have a YouTube tutorial video on the settings rule, which you can access by clicking on this link that you're going to have access to, which will be posted later today. So sorry about that. So here are more discussion topics and questions that you should address with your housing group. Your group has to be on the same page, most likely, when it comes to these issues. And group has to decide, is this development going to be funded privately? Are you going to raise money for this, or both? And how about service operation? Is it going to be Medicaid or private pay funded, or both? We'll get into these topics more later on, but these are very important things that you're going to have to decide together as a group. This is why I know that Jim has talked about why it's so important to work with others, but this is why some families that do have a lot of resources on their own prefer to do things on their own so that they don't have to worry about other people to make decisions, because it is somewhat nuanced issues. And but in the end, there is no one right solution. You're just going to have to find one that works best for you and your group. So again, I'm gonna send it back to Jim.
Okay, everybody. There's different ways you can approach this, okay? But you need to, actually be formed as a corporation. Some of the projects within the country are actually where the family has, or families have an LLC, a limited liability corporation, where they may own the property. And then, there's a service side. So that's actually an option. There's private development or foundations out there that will fund various projects within your community, or even national foundations, that share that sort of interest. Private donations are obviously essential, to make this happen. It may require bank loans. And this is where it gets kind of tricky. If you're this brand new organization, you really don't have a history. So if you were to go to a bank and say, hey, I need $5 million, to push this project forward, it would be probably a pretty tough hill to climb. So this is where it may be great to collaborate with an existing organization, that has all that financial capacity and ability to take out loans, et cetera. There's probably, and again, state by state, there could be community grants available. They might be state grants, they may be local grants, but grants are always something that are quite welcome. When I built the Ark Jacksonville Village, we had a combination of lots and lots of different sources of funding, from tax credits to grants, to local city funding, we launched a capital campaign. There were many, many pots of money that we actually had to pull together to make the project happen. And again, depending on, your ability to raise funds without loans, et cetera, will also impact what you need to charge in rents. And again, these communities need to be affordable. Individuals paying market rent is very, very difficult and all. And depending on what part of the country you're from, it could be absolutely, skyrocket as far as what rents alone could be. And that's even without day-to-day personal expenses and things like that. Public development capital and operating. Okay, this is where the big bucks are. But with this comes all kinds of strings attached and regulations. But again, you're looking at, probably, depending on the size that you want to build this community, and more than likely it is going to be a rental community. It's going to be millions of dollars. And just to give you some examples, because I'm most familiar with Florida, we have a project going up that's 60 units, and it's in a smaller city in Florida, Tallahassee. It's $21 million. And there's another project that's 50 units going up in Miami. And Miami is crazy as far as cost of properties and everything else, $35 million for 50 units. So, depending on where you are, if you're in a smaller community, those prices might seem, just out of the world. So maybe it can be done for a lot less. But again, the cost of construction today has pretty much skyrocketed throughout the entire country. Public land contribution. This is the big one. You'd be surprised how many local, city, county, and state properties that are just sort of out there. There's no real intent to do anything with them at the moment. So research at your local community to see if there are such properties that possibly your organization can get control over. Most of these public properties would be through a long-term lease, usually a 75-year, 99-year lease of the property, which is just as good as owning it. So anyway, that would be a source to look at. because, again, depending on where you are in the country, property can be extremely expensive. Public loans and grants, again, you want to make sure you're doing your research and you're aware of what's available within your community. Low income housing tax credits. This is the affordable housing tax credits that built the Art Jackson, or a good portion of it. There are 9% tax credits, which are a competitive sort of application. And then there's 4%, which are not. Some of the states have opened the door to an RFA specifically targeted for IDD populations, special needs populations, such as Florida has done. Florida is actually taking the lead in the country in providing tax credits to build housing for folks with IDD. And in Florida right now, today, we have 5 properties that are up and running, one under construction and one to be under construction soon. Each year, our Florida Housing Finance Corporation, which handles affordable housing tax credits at the state level, puts out an RFA for an additional intentional community for this population. And the lion's share of the funding would come through these tax credits. So within every single state, you have tax credits, you have affordable housing tax credits. Most states do not do like a set aside, if you will, for the IDD population. They may have multifamily, they may have elderly, they may have veterans, they may have homeless, but typically you're not going to see an IDD. So that is a place where you may want to have a conversation, is with that organization at your state level that actually handles affordable housing tax credits. And years ago, we could not access them either. So the way that happened was there was a couple of groups in Florida that met with the staff of the Florida Housing Finance Corporation and legislators and basically educated them on the housing crisis, folks with IDD are facing. They listened, and they then established, these RFAs to support various projects.
Jim,
Yes.
can you share with the audience what RFA is?
Oh, excuse me. Our requests for applications, requests for proposals, requests for applications.
Yeah. Thank you.
HUD home program. These are mostly some local funding that you're going to receive, like, for instance, subsidy vouchers, HUD subsidy vouchers that people based on their income may be eligible for to provide, safe, affordable housing for them. The Section 8 program and the 811 sort of go together. The 811 is a specific HUD funding source to actually build, and these are usually smaller, more congregate style, and also could be, smaller integrated apartment type complexes. And one of the things you need to consider too, the community you're building, is it intended for IDD specific? Do you want a mixed population? Again, and that's in the planning process. Who are the demographics that are going to live within your community?
Jim, can I add more to the
yes,
public land contribution? So I'm based in the state of California, and the state of California actually has a program where cities and counties send out a notice of surplus land, and they're required to do so every year. And this really program started just a year or two ago, and you actually have to register as a developer, as a qualified developer, in order to be in the mail distribution list. But time and time again, we receive an email from certain cities or counties letting us know of certain property. And they do ask people to submit a proposal for the land that could be, typically it has to be affordable, but it can be for sale or rental properties, depending on what your idea is. And, I just want to kind of let you guys know about that. And oftentimes family advocacy groups have visited cities and counties and have directly asked them for certain properties, and the city and county people have actually provided a lot of funding for that. So do not be afraid to ask. That's how you can actually identify these, very nice properties, especially in states like California and other states where property value is so high. It may not be feasible to come up with some kind of, land that's like $3 million or $5 million for 2-3 acres. So it might be an idea for a good idea for you to approach your local city and government. Another thing that I want to point out is that HUD Section 811 program changed significantly since 2010. And now if you want to build anything that has more than 25% of the units allocated for IDD, you may not qualify for Section 811. I do not agree with the policy, but that's just a fact. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Right. And thank you, Ashley. I think, one of the big themes in this whole thing is about choice. And I know Together for Choice, obviously, is about choice. And there should be options for people and families out there that they can select what type of housing would best meet their needs. And, with some of these programs, you're going to find that they are restrictive. So again, that's part of the research process. When you take public funds, when you accept those dollars, many, many strings attached. It's not just during the construction phase, the development phase, it's forever as far as compliance reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So again, you need to know sort of what you're getting into before you sort of just strike out. Working with a developer, once you get to that point, that's not something you're going to start with, but once you get to the point of working with a developer, depending on the type of financing or funding you're going after, you need to make sure they are a qualified developer. For instance, in Florida, working with the tax credit program, developers have to be qualified, certified in order to be an eligible developer. So anyway, really important to do your homework to make sure, that company meets all the criteria so your project can go forward.
I also want to add that maybe in the state of Florida, my understanding is that developers who you partner with has to be qualified, but they don't have to be one of the partners, right? Like the general partner.
No.
Right.
Correct.
But in the
They don't
state
have
of
to be-
California, when we do 9% tax credit project, the qualified developer actually has to be one of the general partners. So you really have to look into these type of low-income housing programs. Many of these low-income housing, affordable housing programs do require that you work with a developer that has certain number of years of experience or a certain number of project experiences, or else you may not even move forward. And oftentimes cities and counties actually like it when you come with an affordable housing developer that is qualified, so that they know that we know what we're doing.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.
The legal structure, the next slide, please. Again, we're talking some basic information here. If you are not already formed your 501c3, this is something, that you need to do. And also too, if you're looking at, a limited liability corporation, these are things your attorney and your CPA, can help you with. And in some cases, you may be doing both. The LLC, as well as the not-for-profit organization for the service side of things. So anyway, those are really basic things, but you got to start somewhere. So again, if you haven't already done that, highly recommend, that you get all that legal sort of thing out of the way. Ashley, we're going to go to the next slide, which is forming a not-for-profit. You need to figure out, and again, basic here, the name of your organization. You need to make sure that you purchase that domain name, usually with your state Secretary of State's office. You can check with them to make sure that name is not already taken by somebody else. You need to make sure you select officers for the corporation, and that you also have articles of incorporation, bylaws written up. And again, this is where you get into making sure you have legal counsel doing this. Once you do all this, everything has to be done sort of by the book. And you need to follow your bylaws and your articles to make sure that you're recording minutes and that everything is done accordingly. You don't want to get into a lawsuit later on some point. You also are going to need to, and again, your CPA can help you with this, you're going to need to file to the IRS for your employer ID number. You're going to need to be assigned a number, which actually happens rather quickly. You're going to need to also apply to be tax exempt. Now, that tax exemption can take several months to actually get a final exemption just because of IRS's sort of backlog. And also, too, once you really get incorporated and start moving forward, you're going to need to look at making sure that you have insurance, liability insurance, and especially that your officers and directors insurance, that you have them covered just in case of things that could go wrong. So insurance is very, very important to have. Okay, forming a new limited liability company, LLC. Again, it's almost, sort of very similar, to a not-for-profit. Your articles are a lot less involved. You need to make sure you have a registered agent appointed. You need to decide on members versus managing members. Prepare an operating agreement. And again, you need to apply to IRS, for your employer ID number, comply with tax and regulatory requirements, and obtain also to appropriate insurance. Most groups are probably going to go just the regular not-for-profit sort of way in forming their corporation. However, the LLC, can actually come in handy, for specific projects and all. Okay, Ashley, we're going to hand it back to you for your next successful housing models.
Thank you, Jim. When you're trying to figure out an ideal setting for your target population, it will be important for you to know what models are out there, because there's nothing new under the sun. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. In fact, when you try to raise money or receive support from your stakeholder community, it's actually better to show that you're in fact trying to replicate a successful model. I used to proudly say that I was shamelessly copying Jim's work and everyone else's. So you don't have to be the first, you just have to build something that works. So let's go through these type of housing models and see what would be, the best fit for your needs. So one of the most well-known models is a community licensed group homes. It could be HCBS or ICF homes, as I would like to use two different examples. One is called Life Services Alternatives California, and in California, and the other one is Avondale House in Texas. So Life Services Alternatives it manages and operates 15 high-quality licensed residential care homes in neighborhood settings in Santa Clara County, which is in Northern California. And they provide optional in-home day program and community-based day program for individuals who may able to physically go out and participate out in the community. The reason why they have optional in-home day program is that they do serve some folks that are very medically fragile, so they may not be able to participate as much as they can as other physically abled individuals. And all LSA homes are HCBS waiver homes. Avondale House operates 4 ICF community group homes. So far, they have 20 residents, but they would like to expand and open up a couple of more group homes in the near future. Because of the residents that they serve have very complex medical and behavioral challenges. The staff ratio is 1 to 3, but they have a very strong track record of being able to successfully serve individuals with very complex challenges. And I would like to talk about the apartment communities out here. The Arc Jacksonville Village, which Jim has built, this was opened in 2015, Jim, was this?
Yes, 16.
Okay.
Yes.
2016, all right. And Casa de Ama, which is based in Southern California. As Jim has already shared with you, and many of you probably are very familiar with this community, it's an affordable housing community for adults financed through 9% low-income housing tax program, Florida grant, and private capital campaign. And they built 95 apartments with 121 residents, 80% of whom are people with IDD and others who are neurotypical neighbors. And they offer rent and on-site supported living services and auxiliary services. And if you guys like to know more about it, please click on this YouTube link later on. Casa de Ama is a wonderful independent apartment community supporting 35 residential and several non-residential IDD adult clients. They offer rental apartments and on-site supportive living services, and more than 90% of the residents are employed in the community. It's a wonderful community down in Orange County, and I have visited them and participated in many activities with them. They live such a full life. And if you would like to learn more about them, here's a video link that you can click on later. And I love farmstead communities, and I'm an urban person, but whenever I visit these type of farmstead communities, I just feel so calm and peaceful. And you would probably feel the same when you visit these type of communities. I would like to highlight 2 of the communities in the country: Camp Hill Village, USA, and I will talk about other Camp Hill communities as well, and Bittersweet Farms in Ohio. Why do I like to talk about farmstead communities? Because people are healthier and happier when they experience more nature. And studies after studies actually show that when you're exposed to nature, there's actually a correlation between, more exposure to nature and less depression and anxiety. So I just wanted to kind of note this. And so I would like to talk about Camp Hill communities. First Camp Hill community was founded in Scotland in 1939. And since then, now there are 16 Camp Hill communities and affiliates in North America and over 100 worldwide. So it's also called a life sharing community. So residents who are co-workers, people with developmental disabilities, and people, neurotypical coworkers, they're all coworkers and housemates. They support each other in a daily work and share communal meals, and they support individuals at all ages from childhood to aging. Bittersweet Farms is actually considered the first autism farmstead community in America, supporting individuals with actual high behavioral needs. The main campus is in White House, Ohio, with satellite programs in Pemberville and Lima. White House is actually a little bit outside of Toledo. So if you want to go visit them, you can fly into Toledo and drive about half an hour and you can visit this farm. And this Bittersweet Farms is one of very few communities that actually specialize in supporting those with high behavioral needs. The residents receive 24-hour support. They have an ICF community as well as HCBS community, and all the services are funded by Medicaid and HCBS waiver. And we have continuum of care campus communities, one notably Misericordia, and the other one is Annandale Village. Misericordia, as many of you are familiar with, they serve 600 residents and 200-day and weekend participants, but I'm maybe a little bit off on these numbers because I haven't really seen the latest in the last year or two, but I'm sure it's somewhere around here. And they have over 1,100 dedicated employees with ICF facilities, community living apartments, and community group homes, as well as hospice care. So this means that in whatever stage you're in, you will be supported. Because this is all about continuum of care, so that as your needs evolve and change, these type of continuum of care communities have the infrastructure to be able to give you the proper support in whatever stage in life you're in. And so their programs are bakery truck, cafe, gift shop, recycling center, art studio, music and dancing. They are very busy people and they have such a great integrated life and community. And that's why they have over 400 people waiting on their waiting list. Annandale Village is another wonderful community that serves over 170 residents and day program participants. They have personal care home, assisted living community, skilled nursing facility. They also have off-campus independent living program for those that only require some intermittent support. They also provide vocational recreational programs. And we have neurodiverse neighborhoods. Two examples that I would like to highlight. One is called Maple Oaks Community in Michigan, and another one is Prairie House, Wisconsin. So Maple Oaks Community is based in Saline, Michigan, which is right outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's a very nice pocket neighborhood. There are homes for sale, which is completely sold out months ago. And they have 26 neurotypical market rate homes for neurotypical neighbors, as well as a couple of parents. And they have 8 IDD homes that have HOA managed IDD services and programs that would be funded through private pay or Medicaid. And Prairie House, which is a 40-unit apartment complex that are affordable, and 10 of them are actually designed specifically for individuals with intellectual disabilities. So all these different communities are out there. You just have to pick the right one and the one that works for your needs and the vision that you have. So Jim, back to you.
All right, great. We sort of covered some of this, but I'm going to just highlight again. Once you sort of figure out a lot of this, where your funding is going to come from, et cetera, you need to make sure, you're ready to go launch, with your support team to make this happen. And again, probably early on, you want to do some site sort of location. Where are you going to be? You may need to involve a realtor in that if you don't already have that site selected. A project manager, because these things get sort of deep. And if you're doing this on your own and you have not had the experience of managing a project, and again, we're talking usually millions of dollars, paying contractors, et cetera, you want somebody there representing your organization that knows how to do this, how to communicate, with the local building officials, et cetera, keeping the project moving forward. So you're probably going to need to engage a project manager. Of course, early on too, before you start building, you would have selected your architect and getting those plans approved through the city. Your developer, will be somebody that you're going to work hand in hand with as far as the construction of the project. Also too, if you're doing tax credits, you may have a co-developer partner on that too, as well as a separate, contractor to actually do the build. A land use attorney, again, you want to make sure, within your community, the zoning is correct, everything is correct, the density that's required, lots and lots of things to look at, especially if you're not familiar with how this plays out. And again, an accountant, a banker, and eventually a builder are all important partners. And, your team needs to, before you even start building, You need to start looking at identifying potential residents for the community. You just don't want to build it and think, well, once it's built, everybody will come. Again, you want to be building that list throughout the process to make sure when it opens, it's going to be filled. Because again, especially if you have loans on the property, or if it's tax credits, you only have so many months to lease up to like 90% to get all your tax credits. And also too, if you have loans, you're going to need to start paying back on those loans. So you're going to need tenants that can pay rent. The next slide, actually, please.
Yeah.
Design features and amenities. And this is kind of where it gets fun. What do you want your community, to look like? Do you want it to be sort of like cottages, that actually you look like little homes, but maybe there are apartments, 2 or 3 apartment units within each cottage? Do you want it to be, a multi-story building? Exactly, do you want them to be more villa-like? So again, design is anything that you want, really. But you do want to make sure, that it kind of goes with the local surroundings. And you want to make sure it's walkable, and again, also too with property, sometimes, something may be offered to you for free or little money. But again, because of the distance, to get to, things within your community, it's maybe not the best location. Most folks with IDD do not drive. Depending on the city you live in, public transportation may be a nightmare. So you really kind of need to think about all these elements when you're selecting a site. And again, the best site would be walkable. Can people walk to the grocery store? Can they walk and go do things? And I think it's really essential that wherever your community is, that people have total access to the broader community. And to make sure, that you either provide that transportation or that transportation is available. And again, to some of the design features, some of the things that are being looked at now, some communities, families want to own the homes, okay? They're not interested in the renting. So that's a possibility, to have like an HOA sort of community, that you would actually have family-owned homes. And, and again, if you're doing family-owned homes, sometimes too, you're not looking at typical zoning sorts of issues that might pertain to a multifamily sort of project, apartment style. So anyway, it could be an option based on your group, your vision, etc. Some families look at home ownership as being permanent, so they like that idea. When they're no longer here, my son or daughter has their own home. And of course, a home could be spare bedrooms, could be rented out by that homeowner to other individuals, with IDD. So, this is a possibility. Some communities too are looking at mixed, a portion of the community to be rental and a portion of the community to be home ownership. There's lots of different options you need to kind of consider here. The number of units. Now this is big. How large do you want the community? Do you want, and again, I think it also has a lot to do with where you're building. If you're in a rather large metropolitan area, bigger, maybe okay, because you can serve more people, there's more need, et cetera, et cetera. If you're in a smaller community, maybe smaller is something, that would be more appropriate. 20 units, 30 units, something like that versus 50, 60, or 100 units. So anyway, size matters when you're having that conversation. And of course, the size of it too will have a lot to do with what the actual development cost will be. Zoning is, a must. And this is where you need to start talking, with your local officials to make sure that the zoning is adequate. Unit type. And this is a big conversation, and I sort of get off on a rant on this one. 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom units are ideal as far as affordability when you have shared costs. However, when you're asking people with IDD to have a roommate for the rest of their life, it could be problematic. So my recommendation is always build 1 bedroom units. Okay? Do not build 2 bedroom units, 3 bedroom units, etc. People like their own space. Matching roommates, can be difficult at best. And you can only imagine, sharing space with somebody that's not family, indefinitely. It's just nice to have your own space. So if funding allows, because 1 bedroom units are obviously more costly than building shared 2 or 3 bedroom units, that is a consideration and at least worth a conversation with your group. Amenities are huge.
Jim, can I add
Yes,
something though? For
sure,
those that
please.
roommate management is very challenging. I definitely agree. But for those that would benefit from having a live-in share caregiver or two, I think a 2 bedroom would be
Oh,
very
sure.
ideal. So we're not discouraging you from building 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. We just want you to be mindful of the challenges that come with managing roommate relationships, but it would be ideal for certain individuals to have access to 2 bedroom for the sake of having a live-in caregiver.
Thank you for that clarification. Absolutely. Site amenities. This is one of the most important features, I think, when planning your community. You want folks to be socially engaged, okay? Just living in their apartment, all day long and maybe going to work, that's not life. What you would like, I think, is a gathering place. And depending on the size of the property, would determine what that gathering place looks like, how large it is, what you're going to offer in it. Also known as a community center. For instance, folks like to gather socially, hang out, do things together. So opportunities for recreation, also to you may even want to consider dining. Is dining going to be an option outside of someone's apartment? Would an evening meal be something you would want to include in your amenity package? Is it a swimming pool? Is it a gardening area? Are there things to do within that community that would actually give people lots of choices and opportunities for social engagement? And I think social engagement is what makes a lot of these properties, desirable, because you can go live anywhere in any apartment complex, and typically, your neighbors are not going to hang out with you. It's somewhat isolating, but in an intentional community, a village-like community, you surround yourself with things to do. And that is not to suggest, and I want to emphasize, you want to make sure people also have the ability to explore the broader community and they're not isolated, okay? That they can go shopping, they can go work, they do. They're not there in your community 24/7. So, but when you're home, you want to be able to do things with your friends and peers. Okay, the next slide, Ashley. What are your financing options here for acquisition and development? And again, that's where you just dig deep and look at everything that's available out there. You really need to, and this is where you need the pros to come in and help. What are the development costs? And that's where the contractor comes in, the architect, and everybody else involved. You're going to be also, where are the sources of revenue coming in to support this? You can, to create a development budget. And again, this is what the pros are going to do for you. You're not going to do this yourself. If you're in a more rural area, depending on the size of your community, There may be funding available through rural development, for housing. So again, there's different things out there just depending on the location you're at. You need to end up doing a pro forma budget, not just, for the build, but what is it going to take to operate this community? And I'm talking about bricks and mortar. Now, we don't want to put together services with bricks and mortar. We always want to keep them separate. So the bricks and mortar, again, is there a mortgage, that has to be paid? There is going to be ongoing maintenance. The property is just not going to be tip top all the time. It's going to require maintenance. It's going to require replacement. The air conditioners are going to go out. There's going to be a new roof, it needs to be painted. So there needs to be all these things well thought out as far as what it's going to cost to operate. Then you're going to then determine, depending on your project funding, what are your rents. Okay. So again, the more money you can raise or identify in the way of grants, etc., the lower those rents are going to be. If the entire place is built with loans from banks or investors, etc., you're going to end up more in a local market rent sort of arena. You're not going to be really that affordable. Okay, and then you're going to need to get into, and I'm going to talk about this, the next slide is the actual services part of this. The bricks and mortar are just half the equation. And probably the most important part is actually the services and supports that people will actually have available to them. CMS, is Medicaid. Okay, every state in the nation has Medicaid waiver dollars for supports and services. Some states have really embraced intentional communities and providing Medicaid waiver services in those communities. Some states are still reluctant, to do that for various reasons. And I know many of you have participated on webinars before with CMS talking about the settings rule, et cetera. As long as these properties, folks aren't isolated, they're safe, they can make choices, et cetera, you really shouldn't have a problem accessing waiver services unless your state just says absolutely not. It's not a CMS regulation. It's your state's interpretation of. So anyway, Medicaid waiver is probably going to provide services to a great part of the population. I find that a combination of Medicaid waiver residents and private pay residents are actually something that will make the project more financially whole. And again, now I'm talking on the service side. I'm not talking on the rent side. For instance, Medicaid waiver services are typically very specific to the individual. It's not looking at all the individuals within the community. So there is reimbursement usually, say, for supported living coaching or personal supports. And each state may call them different things, but typically, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're paying for supports 24/7. You probably want staff on the property 24/7 living in a unit, okay? One of the apartment units that would be provided, non-revenue unit by your organization to make sure if someone needed assistance during the day, the evening, weekend, whatever, that there is someone there. It'll also require, in order to run the amenities and the rich recreation sort of services you want to offer, you're going to need staff. And Medicaid waiver, doesn't typically pay for a lot of those services. So in order to make the project whole, you may want to offer what can be called auxiliary services. It's not waiver funded, but it gives folks the options to purchase into paying for that recreation, all those staff directed sort of things that you as an organization or your partner organization has to pay for. You got to pay staff, you got to pay for the vehicles, you got to buy gas, all that. So you can actually charge outside of the waiver because it's not a funded service. And then if you have private pay people, that's part of their private pay package for services. So when you combine everything together, it sort of works. Now, if people are on Medicaid waiver, you as your not-for-profit organization, you're the landlord, okay? You cannot provide Medicaid waiver services to residents, okay? You just can't do that in any state. So you have to have other Medicaid waiver providers to do that. And the easiest way to do that is to have a Medicaid waiver partner, okay? And some of your residents, maybe most of them, may pick the partner provider for their services. They may pick another provider from the broader community because they do have choice. And then your private pay would actually receive their services from that provider partner organization.
Jim, I just want to
And also,
add, I just
yeah,
want to add that yes, some states do not allow landlord to provide services, but it really has to depend. It depends on where you are and what the state requirements are. And also there's always a clause that says that if there's no other alternative options that are, and it's ultimately the person's choice. If the provider who happens to be the landlord can provide all the services that meet the person's needs, and the person is choosing the landlord provider service for their needs, then that can be allowed. So I don't think there's any like complete 100% absolute prohibition on landlords being able to provide services. In many of these community licensed group homes or some of the ICF communities and things like that, they are landlord and provider of services. So it really depends on the person's needs and the local state regulations. So you're going to have to check with your own state and state regulations to see if that what is allowed and what is not allowed. But ultimately, it really is about personal choice. I just wanted to add that to you. Sorry.
oh, absolutely. And Ashley is correct. Most of the intentional communities are unlicensed. Okay, they're not, a group home. They're not an ICF. They're unlicensed. They're apartments, sort of living for more independent folks. When you get into license, you're looking at different requirements, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, a provider can be the owner of the property and provide those services in licensed facilities. So again, you just really got to know your state's regulations, et cetera, to move forward. Also, too, in some states, licensed facilities, they have a rule of how many feet, another licensed facility, proximity-wise, can be to another one. So anyway, every state is different as far as how they approach this. So again, homework is essential. But typically in most communities, individuals are receiving their supports from their Medicaid waiver provider and a private provider or organization. And those supports consist typically of daily living, self-help, supported living sorts of things. And again, most of these communities, just depending on the person, as long as they have the supports they need, the community, can be a good fit for them. But again, it's essential that they have the supports that they actually need. And then when you get into day services, most of the communities that are for living are for that purpose. They're residential. There are some communities out there that do have day programs on the same site or co-located with residential. So again, these are under a little bit more scrutiny, if you will, from CMS settings rule. But CMS and states have authorized Medicaid waiver services in many cases. So again, it is a state by state sort of consideration on if they will allow that. Transportation is essential. In your planning, you need to make sure you have vehicles, drivers, volunteers, to get people here and there. And again, how you provide that transportation, if it's part of your package, through auxiliary services, private pay, or if you're charging, whatever it is, but you do need to make sure people have access to the broader community. And we've already mentioned a food service program if that is desirable. Okay, next slide. We're getting towards the end.
I just want to mention again that choice is key, that everyone's choice needs to be documented and well supported in the person-centered plan. And that's something that CMS has stressed over and over again, that this is really about person's choice. And then it has to start from the person's need that's well documented. So,
right. Okay, so if you're ready to roll after all that, here's some outreach sort of recommendations we come up with. You definitely want to launch a capital campaign. And in doing so, you're probably going to want to hire a consultant who actually does capital campaigns. There is a format that should be followed, and getting the advice from a pro will get you, to where you need to be. But again, this is something that is quite complicated, and it may sound easy, but it really isn't easy. You want to make sure you have a nicely designed website that somebody's managing all the time, and you want to keep people updated as to your progress, and to make sure that you're always building your subscribers to your website. You always want to add more people. You do want to host some informational workshops within your community to kind of share what the vision is, and again to kind of keep people excited, get the conversation going, hold focus groups, and again ask for people's input and all. Fundraising. Fundraising is different than a capital campaign. Fundraising is you're hosting a carnival or a spaghetti dinner or whatever you're doing. And capital campaign is actually a targeted process where you're going to hopeful donors to tell them about the project, and and asking them to make a corporate or personal contribution. So it is very, very different sort of skill sets. And again, also too, you need to make sure that once you connect with donors, advocates, and community leaders, that you're keeping in touch with them on an ongoing basis. Don't accept that contribution and then never let them hear from you again. You want to again keep them informed as to the progress that's going on. Project management. There's, besides the project manager that may be more involved in the build part, at some point in time, again, this is if you're a new organization, you're probably going to want to hire an executive director, a CEO, somebody, that is actually going to kind of move this project forward. Doing it through just volunteers, families, very, very difficult. Most families, they're either employed themselves or, they have many, many responsibilities outside of this sort of project. So that's part of your fundraising. You need to look at hiring somebody to sort of make this happen for you. But eventually, you're going to need to create operating policies and procedures in order for the project to be successful long term. You need to have admission criteria. You're going to probably want to do an assessment of potential residents to make sure you're aware of their needs and that they are going to be a good fit for that community and that they do have the supports and services that they're going to require, and to develop a resident handbook. And of course, the training of staff through your partner organization is going to be essential, and the onboarding of staff. There's a lot of expenses involved before you open those doors. You're going to need to bring on staff for the provider organ. And if you have a provider organization, depending on the relationship with your organization, you need to make them whole financially too. So if they're going to take on the responsibility of providing the services, there's a lot of things they're going to be doing and paying staff prior to opening. And even once you open, everybody's not moving in day one. They may be moving in over a period of 3 months. So, but they got to pay staff until, you're full, you're collecting full rents, you're collecting full service fees, or you're collecting labor fees.
I think we have like a minute or two before we can open up for questions and answer. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah.
Okay, I'm done. Basically,
yeah.
at the end of the day, this is our last slide. It's just do something. Doing something, is better than doing nothing. And you may fumble and thinking you're failing, but as long as you keep pushing forward, you're on the right track. And we say good luck. It can be done.